Welcome back to the deep dive. You know the drill, you send us stuff you want to get to the bottom of, and we kind of unpack it together.
Yeah.
Today's deep dive is all about
Mm.
learning representations
Yeah.
by back-propagating errors.
Ooh.
I know.
Yeah.
Quite a mouthful. But it's actually a groundbreaking paper about how we teach computers to learn, especially when it comes to things like image recognition
Yeah.
and even playing games,
Right.
thanks to something called backpropagation.
Yeah. One of the most fundamental concepts in AI today, really.
Really?
This paper was way ahead of its time.
That's pretty amazing to think about. You sent this in, so we're going to figure this out together.
Yeah.
The big question is, can computers actually learn? And if they can, what does that even look like?
Well, they can, but not in the same way we do. Think of it like this. Our brains have billions of neurons connected by synapses.
Right?
Artificial neural networks, the kind of computer systems this paper focuses on, are inspired by that structure.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. Mimicking the human brain.
Yeah.
So instead of actual neurons, we have these artificial ones.
Yes.
So what's the connection?
So instead of synapses, they have connections with something called weights.
Okay.
And those weights determine how strongly signals pass between the artificial neurons. Learning in this context is all about adjusting those weights.
Interesting. So it sounds like they're building their own thought pathways, so to speak.
That's a great way to put it.
Oh, good. I like that.
And that's where backpropagation comes in.
Okay.
It's a method for figuring out how to tweak those connections to get the network to perform better at whatever task we give it.
So we're literally showing the network how to think better.
You got it.
This backpropagation thing sounds pretty crucial.
Absolutely. Now, the paper dives into how these artificial neural networks have hidden units. That sounds a bit mysterious.
It does.
What are those all about and why are they important?
Yeah, like some secret layer of the computer brain. I'm intrigued.
Think of them as the thinking part of the network.
Okay.
Sandwiched between the input, what the computer sees or is given, and the output, its decision or action. These hidden units process information and look for patterns.
Okay, so let me make sure I'm following. The hidden units are where the network starts to connect the dots.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you were teaching a computer to identify a cat in a picture,
Yeah.
the hidden units would be figuring out what features make a cat a cat.
Exactly. They are learning to recognize patterns and features that help the network solve problems.
But how does it actually work? Can you give me a concrete example?
Sure. The paper uses the example of teaching a network to detect symmetry. Imagine you have a simple image made up of pixels.
Yeah.
The network has to figure out if the pattern of those pixels is symmetrical or not.
Right, like a mirror image, sort of.
Exactly. So through backpropagation, the hidden units learn to identify patterns on either side of the image and compare them. If they match, boom, symmetry.
That's so cool. But couldn't you just program a computer to do that directly?
Yeah.
Why go through all the trouble of having it learn through backpropagation?
You absolutely could. But that's where the power of backpropagation really shines.
Okay.
Programming a computer to detect symmetry in every possible image would be incredibly complex and time-consuming.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Backpropagation lets the network figure it out on its own based on the data you feed it.
Okay. I'm starting to see the elegance in this. It's like teaching someone to fish instead of giving them a fish.
Right, exactly.
All right. So what other cool tricks can you teach a network using backpropagation?
Well, the paper gives another fascinating example, teaching a network to understand family relationships.
Wait, family relationships?
Yeah.
Like who's related to who? How on earth can a network learn that?
They used two family trees that were, what's the word? Isomorphic. It's a fancy way of saying they have the same structure, but different people. Think of it like two separate families where everyone has the same role. A father, a mother, a brother, a sister, and so on.
Okay, got it. So it's not about learning specific names. It's about understanding the relationships themselves.
Right. The network is given information about the individuals and how they're related in one tree. Then through backpropagation, it learns to represent these relationships as patterns of activity in its hidden units.
Interesting. So the network is essentially creating a code for father, mother, sister, etc.
Exactly.
Okay.
Then here's the mind-blowing part. When presented with the second family tree, it can apply what it's learned to understand the relationships in that new tree, even though it's never seen those specific people before.
Hold on. So it can take its knowledge from one family and apply it to a completely different family.
Yes.
That's incredible. But I'm still a little fuzzy on how the network figures out the relationships in the first place. Isn't it just being told who's who?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay. The network isn't explicitly told anything about the similarities between the two trees. It figures out the underlying structure of relationships on its own and then applies that knowledge to a brand new situation.
Wow. That's some next level learning. It's like the network has developed a basic understanding of how families work. Okay, I have to ask. If backpropagation is so powerful, are there any limitations?
Well, like anything, it's not perfect.
Okay.
One of the challenges the paper talks about is the problem of local optima.
Local optima. That sounds ominous.
Imagine you're trying to find the lowest point in a valley.
Okay.
You might come across a dip that seems like the lowest point, but if you keep exploring, you might find an even deeper valley.
Ah, so the network might think it's found the best solution, but it's actually just a decent one.
Precisely. It can get stuck in these local optima and miss out on the truly optimal solution.
That makes sense. So how do researchers prevent the network from getting stuck in these dips? One way is to add more connections between the artificial neurons. Think of it like giving our Valley Explorer a wider map to work with. The more paths the network can explore, the more likely it is to find the best possible solution.
So we're basically giving the network more options to consider,
Exactly.
helping it avoid those dead ends. That's clever. But even with these limitations, it sounds like backpropagation has been a game changer. It's pretty mind-blowing to think that something this complex is happening inside computers every day. I'm going to need a minute to process all of this.
Take your time. It's a lot to take in. And this is really just scratching the surface of what backpropagation can do.
I can only imagine.
Ugh.
All right, we're back, and my brain is definitely buzzing.
Yeah.
Still from that last segment.
Mm.
Backpropagation is a lot more intricate than I initially thought.
It is a fascinating concept, for sure. And it gets even more interesting when you start to dig into how it actually works, like the specifics of it.
Well, that's what you're here for.
Yeah.
The paper mentions something called gradient descent. What exactly is that, and what role does it play in backpropagation?
So it's really at the core of how backpropagation works.
Okay.
It's a mathematical technique for finding the best possible values for those connection weights that we talked about.
Right.
Imagine you're trying to find the lowest point in a vast mountainous landscape.
Okay, so I'm picturing myself like a hiker in this vast mountain range.
Yeah.
What am I looking for?
You're searching for the deepest valley, the global minimum.
Okay.
That represents the ideal set of weights where the network makes the fewest errors and performs at its best.
Got it. So the weights are like my coordinates on a map, leading me to the perfect spot.
That's a great way to think about it.
Oh, perfect.
Gradient descent uses math to figure out the slope of the error function at your current location. That slope tells you which direction to go to descend most quickly.
Okay, so I'm constantly adjusting my position based on the steepness of the terrain, always heading downhill.
You got it.
Towards the lowest point.
Exactly. You take small steps, constantly reassessing the slope, and over time you get closer and closer to the bottom of that valley.
Right.
The optimal set of weights.
Well, hold on. Didn't we talk about those local optima, those misleading dips that can kind of trick the network?
Right.
How does gradient descent help avoid those?
That's where backpropagation comes in.
Oh.
It combines gradient descent with a way of calculating the error
Okay.
for each weight in the entire network.
So it's not just looking at my immediate surroundings, it's considering the whole landscape
You got it.
to make sure I'm going in the right direction.
Precisely. It's like having a bird's eye view of the entire mountain range.
Wow.
So you can make smarter decisions about which path to take.
That makes so much sense. Backpropagation is like a superpowered GPS for our hiker,
Yeah.
making sure they find the true lowest point and don't get stuck in a dead end. This is all starting to click into place now.
Yeah, it really is a clever combination of math and inspiration from the way our own brains learn.
Okay, so we've covered gradient descent, backpropagation, and these hidden units.
Right.
Is there anything else essential for understanding how these networks learn?
I think the key takeaway here is that backpropagation allows networks to learn from their mistakes. It's a continuous process of making predictions, comparing those predictions to the correct answers, and then tweaking those weights to get better and better.
It's like practicing a new skill, right?
Yes.
You try, you get feedback, and you adjust your technique until you master it.
Exactly. The more data you feed the network, the more opportunities it has to practice and refine its understanding. That's why we've seen such incredible advancements in AI recently. We have access to massive amounts of data and powerful computers to crunch it all.
Now, there's one more thing that caught my eye in the paper. Recurrent networks.
Hmm.
What are those and how do they differ from the layered networks we've been talking about?
Great question. Recurrent networks add another layer of complexity. Unlike layered networks, where information flows in one direction, recurrent networks have connections that loop back on themselves.
So the information can circle back and influence itself.
Yeah.
What's the advantage of that?
This allows them to process sequences of data, things like time series or sentences,
Hmm.
where the order of the input matters. Think about how the meaning of a word in a sentence depends on the words that came before it.
Right. Context is everything.
Yes.
So these recurrent networks have a kind of memory of what came before.
That's a great way to put it. It makes them particularly well suited for tasks like natural language processing or analyzing stock market trends.
That's fascinating. But can you even apply backpropagation to these recurrent networks
Yeah,
with all their loops and feedback?
you can, but it requires a bit of ingenuity. You essentially unfold the recurrent network in time, creating a layered network
Okay.
where each layer represents a moment in time.
Okay.
Then you can apply the same backpropagation techniques.
It's like turning a spiral staircase into a straight ladder so you can walk up it step by step. That's a great analogy. So even with these more complex network structures, the same principles of backpropagation apply.
Exactly. It's a testament to the power and flexibility of this approach. And remember, this paper was written back in 1986. Imagine what they would have thought if they could see how backpropagation has shaped the world of AI today.
It blows my mind to think about all the amazing applications that we see every day. Self-driving cars, language translation, medical diagnosis, all built on this foundation of backpropagation.
It's quite remarkable, isn't it?
It really is. But before we get too carried away, let's take a moment to appreciate the elegance and impact of backpropagation. Then we'll wrap things up with some final thoughts. Back in a flash, listeners.
And we're back. I don't know about you, but I'm still reeling from all this backpropagation talk. It's amazing to see how something so fundamental has had such a huge impact on the world. It really has revolutionized AI. We've gone from computers struggling to recognize basic shapes to systems that can understand natural language, diagnose diseases, and even create art. It's mind-boggling.
It is. But like we were discussing before, it's important to remember that this is just one model of learning. Even the paper itself mentions that it's not a perfect replica of how our brains work.
Exactly. Backpropagation, at least in its current form, has some limitations.
Right.
For example, it relies heavily on labeled data. We have to tell the network exactly what each input represents.
Right.
But humans often learn without needing those explicit labels.
Right. Think about how kids learn language.
Yeah.
They don't have dictionaries attached to their heads labeling everything they see and hear.
Yeah.
They learn through observation, context, and trial and error.
Precisely. That's why there's so much research focused on developing new learning algorithms that can learn more like humans do without needing all that hand-holding with labeled data.
That's fascinating. So even with all the incredible progress backpropagation has enabled, there's still a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah.
Sounds like the future of AI is wide open.
It absolutely is. As we explore new approaches and learn more about how our own brains function, who knows what incredible breakthroughs are on the horizon. We might even reach a point where AI surpasses human intelligence in every aspect.
Now that's a thought-provoking idea.
Yeah.
It's both exciting and a little bit intimidating to think about the possibilities.
It certainly is. But for now, let's appreciate how far we've come thanks to backpropagation.
Yeah.
It's been a game changer, and I'm incredibly excited to see what the future holds for this field.
Well said.
Yeah.
I think we've given our listener a lot to ponder today. Any final words of wisdom before we wrap up our deep dive into backpropagation?
Just this. Never stop being curious, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and never lose that sense of wonder about the world and the incredible things we can achieve with technology.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Huge thank you to our resident expert for breaking down this complex topic and making it so accessible. And to you, our listener, thanks for sending in this fascinating paper and for joining us on this deep dive into the world of backpropagation. We'll be back soon with another exploration into the frontiers of knowledge. Until then, keep those brains buzzing.